These days the world of adult animation isn't exactly a challengingly creative one. You talentless hacks. While there are obvious exceptions to the rule, these are mostly rare occurrences as the world of adult animation is usually filled with copycats who are trying to hopelessly chase the success of The Simpsons and Family Guy. Okay, mostly Family Guy, but it wasn't always like this, specifically in the late 90s to early 2000s. There was quite a lot of variety when it came to adult animation. Not everything worked, obviously, but many of these shows stood out not just because they were exceptional, but because their quality was not inherently tied to being a clone of other popular shows. Alas, many of these shows were often cancelled shortly into their lifespan, but they've maintained a cult following over the years due to how good they actually were. Or through memes. One of these shows, and also one of my favourite TV shows of all time, was Clone High.
Way back in the 1980s, secret government employees.
Clone High is a show that I've held in high regard for several years now, because there's really nothing else like it. Parodies of teen dramas aren't a shockingly new concept, nor is there not an abundance of them, but Clone High stood tall above the rest with its combination of surreal, fast-paced comedy, and keeping its characters grounded in reality. Each character had a distinct and memorable personality that always made them entertaining to watch. The animation, despite its simplicity, was quick and perfectly timed, the show was incredibly self-aware but never to an insufferable degree, and the dialogue was incredibly sharp. And it was this show, along with Jump Street, the Lego Movie, and Spider-Verse, that made me a huge fan of Phil Lord and Christopher Miller's work. They have a signature sense of humour that's present in all of their projects, and very rarely do they tend to miss the mark. The show is set in a high school populated by clones of famous historical figures being run as an experiment by the military. Each of the characters, Abe Lincoln, Joan of Arc, Gandhi, Cleopatra, and JFK, all have their own character-focused storylines and each get an appropriate amount of screen time, all with memorable moments of their own, despite the show following a recognizable formula for its 13-episode run. Despite how formulaic the show is, it attempts to cram as many jokes as it can into nearly every scene, something that Lord and Miller are pretty well known for doing in many of their projects. But in Clone High, it's the most noticeable. The show is very silly and doesn't take itself seriously whatsoever, treating each scene, action, and line of dialogue as an opportunity for a quick gag, with most of them miraculously working.
So, are you drunk enough yet to sleep with me? Answer the question!
To this day, Clone High is still one of the funniest and most quotable shows I've ever watched, and the show hasn't really aged at all. It really does say a lot about the show's quality when 20 years after the original show met its end due to cancellation, it's been given a second chance in the form of an all-new season/reboot. Lord and Miller have been trying to get Clone High back on the air for pretty much their whole careers. They haven't been very subtle about that, and when news broke out about the show finally being continued after all this time, I was ecstatic. Clone High being set in modern times sounds like a great idea on paper. I mean, think of all of the new things they could possibly satirize.
Send them back to high school and secretly groom them.
And I have a lot of faith in Lord Miller and Bill Lawrence given their many years of success. That was until the first episode of the reboot leaked online a few months back and things were not looking too good.
Abraham Lincoln, you are cancelled.
Yeah.
Wow, so positive.
Yes, I am positive I like.
There was mixed reception across the board, with many people happy to finally hear news about the show, but many noting the lack of decent execution, choppy animation, and lackluster jokes in comparison to the original series. It felt incredibly neutered, like it had the spirit of the original series, but none of the energy and timing, coupling that with the absence of Gandhi, arguably one of the show's best characters, and it left the reboot feeling sterile and kind of boring. However, it was quickly stated that this episode was unfinished. Makes sense, since it was leaked and all, and many people, myself included, brushed it off as it's just the first episode, and remembering that it's been 20 years since the original show ended and it's likely they're just getting back into the swing of things, and that the rest of the series would be a lot better. Drowning ourselves in copium. The phrase cautiously optimistic is now a Winter Soldier trigger word for me. A lot of that hope went out the window once we got the first trailer, where it was clear that not much had really changed from the leaked pilot. But now a new wave of skepticism came in from a wider source of people who didn't watch the leaked episode. A lot of this largely and admittedly consisted of people getting angry that Gandhi's missing, but a lot of eyebrows were raised at the designs of the new characters that would be joining the old ones, many of which looking over-designed and completely clashing with the show's art style. Not helping was the absence of any genuinely funny jokes from the trailer, and featuring an oddly violent scene of Cleopatra injuring herself in a bloody, over-the-top fashion that felt completely alien to the kind of humor the show was known for having, even when they did show blood.
Are those longer sideburns?
Still, I held on to hope and was incredibly excited. I mean, it's Lord and Miller, JFK's still there, they used the Blink-182 song in the trailer, you can't do this to me. And now we're here with the first two episodes out on HBO Max. out on Max, with more on the way next week. Now, this video's purpose isn't to condemn the entire show forever, because these are just the first 2 episodes, and I've heard some people who have seen the full series say that it gets better later on, but the first 2 episodes of this Clone High reboot demonstrate some really frustrating issues and overall seem to lack the comedic spark of the original. And this isn't a "grah, those people are taking over my cartoons," like, okay, unlucky I guess, keep bumbling. Twitter's down the corner to the left, so I wanted to quickly go over my current problems with this incredibly messy reboot while still holding out on hope that the series gets better.
Way back in the 1980s, secret government employees.
Abraham Lincoln, you are cancelled.
Dear God, Clone High was very funny.
That no good cheating tramp. Hey, get off my dinghy!
It was made on a shoestring budget, but the simple and snappy animation combined with the vocal delivery of each line gave each joke such a great impact. As previously stated, every scene was an opportunity for them to tell like 5 different jokes.
I can't bear to talk about it.
Thank God, because I hate it
It
when...
all started freshman year.
For reference, I went back and rewatched the original series before watching the reboot, then watched the first 2 episodes after the reboot, and it's honestly insane just how painfully unfunny the reboot is in comparison. Don't get me wrong, there's still some funny gags here that channel the spirit and energy of the original series, stuff that makes it very evident that it's made by the same people.
You want to see my lighthouse impression I've been working on?
But comparing the 2 side by side, they feel incredibly different. One is a show that tried to squeeze a joke out of nearly every moment with fast-paced surrealism, and the other is a show that constantly drones on and on about how it's no longer 2003. People use the internet now. Yet this is one of those reboots where the classic characters are introduced to the modern world, and initially I didn't have many reservations about this as I believed they'd be able to circumvent and subvert this in a way that was still funny. Not the case. The first 2 episodes of this show are everything wrong with modern revivals in my opinion, making numerous obvious jokes about the wonders of the internet as well as internet arguments that Smosh did better nearly 10 years ago. And when it isn't jokes about the wonders of modern technology, it's all about emphasizing how different the cultures between 2003 and 2023 are, which is a cool idea on paper, but they instead opt for having all of episode 1 be about cancel culture, which feels incredibly late, right? I wince when people use the term cancelled on the internet seriously, let alone making jokes about Abe being incredibly offensive on a scale that he never used to do previously just to make the plot work, with jokes that are like 4 years out of date. It makes sense given the context of the episode, but acting like the original series was built on offensive humor to the point where nearly everything coming out of Abe's mouth is considered offensive by today's standards is really dumb. Clone High had some offensive jokes, but it was never the main thing the show had going for it. Heck, the most offensive thing about the show, the clones of historical figures part, is still present in the reboot. This is Harriet Tubman. Abe never went around saying all of this stuff in the original as much as he could, and disregarding the modern day jokes, the rest of the jokes are just really lame.
Like, did someone order a 20-year cliffhanger?
The only consistently funny part of this reboot is Scudworth. Every scene he's in has been fantastic so far and has that same signature timing from the original series.
Completely undetected.
Hey, wait a second. But everything just feels off. Like, watch the first 5 minutes of episode 1 for the original series and then watch the first few minutes of episode 1 for the reboot. You should be able to quickly notice just how often the original series tried to make a joke as well as how many of them worked thanks to their timing. Quick cuts, snappy animation, just plain funny delivery, especially from JFK.
I will see you there. And by will, I mean won't.
Surreal cutaway gags, and then you watch the reboot. The level of jokes per minute is down considerably, and the jokes that are there just don't cut it. Like, there's a crazy amount of setup for this one random out-of-place fart joke. The scene lasts for like 20 seconds or something, and the joke is just dog shit. The show tries to recapture the self-awareness of the original, but goes way overboard by replacing an actual punchline with a direct breaking of the fourth wall, taking shots at how the original show had a single female writer and staring at the screen.
That is unthinkable and very specific.
You're Reddit gold, sir.
Clear as Miami Beach seawater. Minus all the
Ah, ha 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 ha. You see, it's funny because you use those for sex. There's also a weird amount of blood and violent humor in the reboot compared to the original. Like, the first episode alone has like 3 jokes that produce more blood than the entirety of the original. And I don't really know why, because not only are the jokes drawn out and not pleasant to look at, they're also not very funny. They feel like cheap replacements in places where an actual joke or punchline should be. Like when Cleopatra's having a hard time adapting to not being popular anymore, so she steps in a bear trap, shoots an arrow in her eye and lights herself on fire. It feels cheap and incredibly lazy. What's not helping this is that not only are new clones not funny at all, besides a few lines from Christopher Columbus, but the original characters barely say anything funny either. Abe's about the same as usual, except this time he doesn't have his cartoonish obliviousness to Joan's love for him to play off of. Cleopatra is pretty much absent in both episodes. Joan is just a constant mess of thoughts with nothing funny to say, and JFK still has the iconic voice, even if it is wavering a bit, but he's again given nothing funny to say or exaggerate, except this part.
Boy, you have so many thoughts and unsolicited opinions!
He's just saying things in the JFK voice. There's no jokes or jokes about his funny way of pronouncing things, he's just doing the voice. It's incredibly disappointing to see the fast-paced and frequent jokes of the original be substituted for something that doesn't nearly have as many jokes, and the jokes it does have aren't even good.
Juggle famous guys and ladies and made up using jelly coffees.
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys! Wow!
Clone High's characters are iconic. Okay, let's get it out of the way. Gandhi is gone and I'm upset about it. I think everyone can relate on that front, but him being gone wasn't a hard sell for me. I was still going to watch the series because the rest of the cast were still hysterical in the original series. Clone High 2023 brings back Abe, Joan, JFK, and Cleo, and they all act the same as they always have. However, one of the best things about the original series was that every character got a chance to shine nearly every episode. It never felt as if the characters were ever competing for screen time. They were all funny in their own unique ways, and there was rarely ever a moment where one felt sidelined in favor of another. But they accomplished this in the original series because they had 5 main characters to work with across 20 minutes per episode, giving each one just the right amount of time to be used in the plot. It was very tightly written in that sense. However, despite the absence of Gandhi, Clone High 2023 suffers from a pretty large character problem. The show introduces us to 4 new clones: Confucius, Harriet Tubman, Christopher Columbus, and Frida Kahlo. And if they were replacing the original characters, then, you sinful bastards, then I can see them working a lot better. But they're instead additions to the main cast, giving us 8 main characters. This results in issues with screen time. Screen time issues in Clone High. Cleopatra has like 10 lines between both episodes. She says like 2 things at the start of episode 2 and then just disappears. She insults Joan for like 5 seconds and then pieces the f*** out. Confucius just feels like an afterthought in the first episode after they gave lengthy introductions to the other new clones and used them for a few jokes, and his only purpose in the plot is to put Abe on TikTok and to pretty much act as a replacement for Gandhi, with none of what made Gandhi so funny in the first place. And personality-wise, these characters just don't cut it. Clone High's characters were incredibly simple, but they were all equally charming and had very different personalities, which led to each character bouncing off each other extremely well, especially in the case of Abe and Gandhi, as well as Joan and JFK. In comparison, Confucius is an overdone Zoomer trope who uses modern lingo and talks like an influencer with all the comedic depth of a Borderlands character. Harriet and Frida are just nice people, except Harriet is more extroverted and Frida is a bit more laid back. The only character who seems to have a quirky personality on par with the original clones is Christopher Columbus, who's a lot more reserved than the others, but has this secretly deranged side to him that allows him to gel pretty well with Abe. And his whole thing about using an alias to distance himself from the real Christopher Columbus was honestly one of the few funny ideas present in the pilot episode. But overall, these characters just do not compare to the original clones, not helped by the fact that the series now feels incredibly overcrowded and is leaving many of the characters in the background. Now the original series was cancelled over Gandhi, I think most of us know the story. The Indian public found him incredibly offensive to the legacy of the real Gandhi by portraying this version as a jerky party animal, and they went on a hunger strike outside the NTV offices in India, trapping people inside. And in one part, I do understand why Gandhi isn't here as to not cause any offense to many of Gandhi's followers. Incredibly ironic given the real Gandhi was far worse. And it would suck to have the show get cancelled immediately, but the absence of most of the show's signature humor, coupled with these incredibly underwhelming new cast members, really accentuates how empty the show feels without him. It is still possible for him to return if the show gets a season 4, but that's like a long time away from now. I never expected the new characters to be anywhere near as funny as JFK or Gandhi, but they have next to no personality traits. What doesn't help is the lack of any gags poking fun at their historical heritage. The best we've gotten is for Christopher and this random gag with Frida's unibrow, and that's it. There's no little extra touches or jokes like Abe sitting behind a portrait of Lincoln's assassination while talking about leadership, JFK flinching when people finger gun him, stuff like that. The only character here that seemed to get a decent amount of screen time and is still pretty funny for the most part is Scudworth, but that's because it's integral to the formula of the show in a way that can't be easily broken by the inclusion of new characters. Removing one of the best characters and adding an additional 4 who only serve to overcrowd the show and spout unfunny jokes is not a very good trade-off. This won't take too long. Yeah, these designs suck, not as standalone character designs, but when contrasted against the iconic look of Clone High and the characters that return from the original series, they clash hard, and that's most likely the point. After all, they're from 2023 and would obviously dress a little different to the original characters, but just because it's intentional does not mean it looks good. The colours are distractingly bright, and their outfits are incredibly over-designed compared to how simple everything else looks of its flatter colours. You could have easily accomplished the effect of making them look different while having them fit with the show's art style. You didn't have to just take two total drama characters and plop them into Clone High, and even ignoring the colours and over-designing, can you tell who these characters are supposed to be at a glance? You show me JFK and I can recognise that this is a teenage interpretation of JFK. He looks the part. Same for Gandhi, Joan, Cleo, and Abe. The only two of these characters that looks like the characters they're representing are Frida and Christopher Columbus, and Frida's design still clashes with the show's art style. You genuinely have to be told by these characters who they actually are, because what about these characters screams Confucius and Harriet Tubman to you? As Clone High characters, they fail to fit in, and as teenage versions of their respective famous people, only two of them really qualify. As for the overall animation, the original Clone High was made on a low budget, but it made up for that with a sharp, distinct art direction using the snappy animation for quick comedic timing. With the jump to HD and a wider aspect ratio, I knew the show wouldn't look quite the same, but this art style definitely has the potential to look appealing in HD with its sharp and thick outlines and simple backgrounds. But god, that potential is just squandered here. The show doesn't look bad, but it's a serious downgrade compared to the original, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. There's some really good looking shots here, but a lot of them feel kind of empty. Like, not enough of the frame is being filled, and the lack of details in the background instead of looking charming comes off as really cheap looking in some scenes, like the cafeteria. Like, I'm not the only one that thinks this looks really bad, right? Some extra lighting would have gone a long way. And the animation looks weirdly choppy. Like, there is some weird ass tweening going on here, and honestly the snappier movements of the original show just look so much better to me. Helped when it came to comedy too. Overall, Clone High Season 2, or Reboot, or whatever, is technically fine so far. It's definitely possible the show can get a lot better, and if that happens, I'll be sure to review the full series once it's finished. But as of right now, I don't think you can blame me for not liking the first two episodes. The first 40 minutes of this long-awaited revival to one of my favourite TV shows of all time being mid. These episodes are incredibly messy, and if it wasn't for the visuals, it wouldn't feel like Clone High much at all. I can only hope the series gets better over time, because it really does suck for the first two episodes of this show to barely make me crack a smile, aside from when they reference Gandhi still being frozen. When the first two episodes of the original series made me laugh out loud multiple times. I just wanted to get my thoughts out on this quickly. Also, you better bring back Gandhi for season 4, that is now a promise in my eyes.